glad to be here with this very distinguished panel uh, addressing this very urgent issue. I worked in the Indian internet industry before I came to the US some 22 years ago as a graduate student. And uh, the moment I decided to study Hindu nationalist communities online, which is what my research is focused on, was when one of the columnists at the online Indian portal that I worked for called rediff.com, which was India's first startup, wrote a terrifying piece defending the murder of Australian missionary Graham Staines and his son in 1999 by the Bajrang Dal, a Hindu nationalist group. What was frightening was not just the article, but also the outpouring of support that the perspective expressed in the article got. And that became my topic of study. And it's something that I focused on for 20 years, looking at how the Hindu right has weaponized and mobilized the internet to whip up hate against minorities, to enable a climate of violence against minorities, and to essentially undermine Indian secularism and propagate the ideology of Hindutva. 20 years later, this all of this has come to a head. As we speak now, I want to stress three things about this particular moment. The first is that I think there is a plausible case to be made that we are already in the first steps of a genocide. A number of my colleagues mentioned Dr. Gregory Stanton, and I was watching something by him where he says his 10 stages of genocide are not necessarily sequential, but they are processes. And what he says is that these processes are sort of well underway in India. I think whether it is Muslims being attacked for the sake of being Muslim, whether it is Muslim property being demolished, whether it is Indian Muslims being accused of being non-citizens, all of this is proceeding apace, and it actually fits with the definitions of conventions of genocide. So the time to act is now, and sanctions can be an especially powerful way because they signal that the world is watching and that the US is watching. And international attention does have this powerful effect because for several reasons it's extremely important to the self-image of the BJP and the Hindu right that America in particular should recognize and even praise India and praise Mr. Modi's initiatives. The second point I want to make is that as a student of history and of the use of media and propaganda and violence, I teach a course called Violence and Communication, in which we look at events such as the partition, the Holocaust, the genocide in Rwanda, from covering a range of literary, archival, historical materials, and media representation. There are alarming similarities and parallels. And one of the very genuine worries that a number of people have expressed is that, very often there are these incidences which spark off sectarian violence. And in these incidences, it is often alleged that Muslims have done X or Y act to provoke Hindu violence, which then occurred naturally. But very often the evidence for such acts is very flimsy. And this is what we saw in the anti-Muslim violence that followed in Godhra in Gujarat in 2002, when a group of Muslims allegedly set a fire to a train which was carrying Hindu activists who, were screaming anti-Muslim slogans. Evidence remains inconclusive that the fire was started by Muslim groups. The state official who pointed this out was immediately transferred. What followed in that wake was retaliatory violence. Home Minister of Gujarat, Hiren Pandya, claimed that he was in a meeting where Mr. Modi allowed mobs or told the police and told the state authorities that he should let violence, they should not interfere to stop violence against Muslims. Mr. Pandya was assassinated in 2003. There is no other word to describe it. And a number of witnesses involved with associated cases turned hostile. Now, the violence that followed was horrific, and as a result of that, Mr. Modi, as everyone on this panel will know, was denied a visa to the US. Since then, he has embarked on a very careful rehabilitation. He fought the 2014 elections on the platform of development. After 2019, when he and his party won even more convincingly, the gloves are off, and the sole agenda is essentially implementing a Hindu state. So that's my second point. The third point I want to stress on essentially is some of the strategies that will be used to distance, for the government to avoid culpability. At this point of time, what has happened is essentially the BJP has fused with the Indian state. And Indian state organs are complicit with this. We have a pliant media. For the most part, Indian media has been able to rightfully claim that it has a high degree of independence. Alas, that is no longer the case. The legacy media, the mainstream television channels, are overwhelmingly parroting the government point of view, including not critically commenting on the kinds of actions we see, but actively endorsing and calling for violence against Muslims. The internet, social media are rife with the worst kinds of horrific pro-genocide sentiments. These are pervasive. Twitter, Facebook, other social media platforms have not done enough. Now, with this fusion of the state with the BJP, as has also been the case with the Nazis, essentially what has wound up happening is that humiliating, insulting, or attacking Muslims has de facto become a kind of hallmark of being both a good Hindu and being a true Indian citizen. So this is extremely, extremely alarming, because it actually not just excuses violence or turns a blind eye for it, but actually calls upon Hindus to perform violence against Muslims symbolically, to abuse them or physically attack them as proof of being a good Indian and being a good Hindu. And this violence has already been outsourced to some extent, which gives the government, BJP leaders, some kind of a measure of, especially the higher ranks of BJP leaders, a measure of kind of immunity from it. Although lower level leaders have openly bayed for Muslim blood, and nothing has happened to them. The authorities are also complicit in letting Hindu right-wing organizations off the hook. In recent violence against a Muslim community, the VHP was initially booked. That's a Hindu right organization. They threatened violence if any of their quote-unquote activists would be booked, and the Delhi police withdrew the case. The fig leaf the government will hide behind, the central government, is that law and order in India is a state matter. Knowing all of this, I think, is just important from the point of view of context, because it should not obscure the fact that this anti-Muslim violence is central. It is central to the project of the Modi government. It has become a reason of state and society, and it calls upon us to act very, very urgently. So I will leave it at that. And once again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts.
How do people living in the United States in particular call out the United States government and their local representatives to kind of show like, hey, there's kind of a double standard here with how India is being treated as a very important partner of the United States, while at the same time devolving so rapidly into this authoritarian style of rule? And how do people such as common citizens of the United States, how do we impact that change?
Yeah, I want to first just start by saying the fact that as we are speaking, there is a program on India's arguably worst channel, and that's, which channel is the worst, television channel is the worst. We could spend hours debating Republic, which talks about literally this being an anti-India conspiracy. Right now, at this moment, it's being streamed on Twitter, which, tells us something about the significance of the report itself. What I want to talk about is a couple of things also, that it's important to recognize that just as, the worst violence is reserved for those who are on the ground in India, no question, but the Hindu diaspora who support Mr. Modi, especially very, very powerful people based here, organizations, entrepreneurs who are billionaires, literally, also support Mr. Modi's project, and they are also attacking and harassing journalists and academics who are based in the US. Anyone who tries to raise this issue. And now the matter has escalated to the point where those entities like prominent universities which have had a relationship with India and South Asia, which have been an important space. Just given the commitment to academic freedom, given the First Amendment, they've been a space for views to be freely heard. They're coming under pressure and they are bending to the pressure that the Indian state is putting. You may have heard that Mr. Akar Patel, who was former chairman of Amnesty India, he was denied a visa to come to India, to come to the US and speak, which tells us again, something about how the Modi government is attacking and going after anyone who's critical of its policies. He was supposed to have an online conversation on Zoom with the Center of South Asia, and mysteriously, they cancelled it on the excuse, I believe, I may be wrong about this, that they didn't have funds for an $800 honorarium. Please do not tell me the University of Chicago cannot come up with $800. And the word on the street, I cannot have conclusive proof, so hopefully the University of Chicago doesn't send me a legal notice. But the word on the street is that the Indian consulate at the University of Chicago called them and said that funding would stop. It was a very terse email, and Akar himself is completely befuddled by it. The University of California, Berkeley's platformed Smriti Irani, who's whitewashing the deeds of the misdeeds of the Modi government. And then what happens is that these talks, the Hindu right claims that this gives them legitimacy because prestigious American universities have supported them. They completely misrepresented. And I think, entrepreneurs, organizations like the Hindu American Foundation, which are completely part of the Hindu right wing, on their website, at least as of a few months ago, they supported the construction of the Ram temple on the site of the Babri Masjid, which was demolished. They have co-opted this language of victimhood, and they claim that they are the victims of racism, that people like us are anti-Hindu, whereas they have been filing legal cases against academics, against journalists, for anyone either pointing to the links between the Hindu right in America and the Hindu right in the US, including alleged misuse of COVID funds. They went after a journalist from Al Jazeera, Rakib Naik, for this. Now, these are organizations with tens of millions of dollars. What I think Americans need to do, and large numbers of members of the community need to do, is look at the hypocrisy here. The same people who in the US support secularism, want minority rights, want affirmative action, talk about separation of church and state, benefit from it, use a language of minority rights, claim they are victims of historical holocausts against Hindus which never existed, are openly supporting calls for genocide in India, or coming up after making some tokenistic noises against violence, coming up with the most convoluted justifications for the barbaric violence that Mr. Modi, the BJP, and the Hindu right have unleashed. So, this is something that those who are in power, members in the Indian community, entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley, CEOs, as well as wider society, civil society organizations really need to call the Indian community out on. Doing so is not racist. They will play the card that we are being persecuted. That is not the case. You do not get to claim you are being victimized just because you are of Indian origin or you are Hindu if anyone calls out your support for genocide. I think that's really important. That's something that puts a lot of Americans on the back foot, and to use a metaphor from cricket, they shouldn't do that. And I think we need to call out this hypocrisy. So, thank you.